Welcome back, viewers. You are viewing Good Morning Tobago GMT, and if you are viewing us for the very first time, a special welcome and thank you for joining us. You are viewing Tobago Updates Television. To our viewers online as well who have been with us from the morning show, thank you for staying with us as well. And of course, I encourage you to share the live. There are others who need to know what's going on in this beautiful island of Tobago. This morning, our guest joins us virtually, and he is none other than Dr. Vanus James. And we are going to be talking about what most of you have been discussing all week long when our Prime Minister Stuart Young announced the revocation of the OFAC license. Now, some of us understand this inside out. Some of us need to do more research. So I hope at the end of this conversation you are clearer and we all understand the significance of this change. And we look forward, I hope I can use that word, in terms of what is to come for us as an economy. So I welcome Dr. James this morning. Good morning, Dr.
Morning,
James.
morning. Good morning. How are you?
I am well, and how are you this morning, sir?
I'm doing fantastic.
Right, and of course, for those who are not familiar with Dr. James, where have you been? This is Dr. Vanus James, professor, economist, you just name it. He has worked and consulted with international agencies, and he continues to champion the cause for Tobago and Tobagonians. So let's get right into it, Dr. James. We know that a lot of people are talking about this revocation of this OFAC license, what it means. We're hearing about the Dragon gas field, and there are some people who really don't understand what has happened. How does it connect us to the US, etc.? So I want us to start there quite briefly in terms of explaining for those who may have missed it when the Prime Minister made the announcement about the revocation of this OFAC license. One, who is OFAC? What is this license about? And then what it means for us having this license revoked.
Well, let's give a common sense answer, a non-technical answer for the benefit of the public. The government of Trinidad and Tobago under Rowley made a deal with the government of Venezuela, quote unquote, with the approval of the U.S. government. Right. To allow for the joint exploration, exploitation, and so on of the gas reserves lying between Venezuela and Trinidad and Tobago, but basically owned by Venezuela. And Venezuela has been having difficulty with the U.S. for some time because of the stance of the Maduro government, the political stance. And so they are having trouble exploiting and exporting their gas. And Trinidad and Tobago thought it could take advantage of the opportunities provided by having these large reserves, trillions of cubic feet of gas available right on our doorstep. And since we've been doing a lot of things with processing gas downstream on our Atlantic trains and so on, LNG trains, we thought we could go ahead and extract some of that and export it through our capabilities. And Venezuela agreed with Rowley's government, and they thought they could basically rely on that for the future. So Rowley promised that sometime in 2027, when that begins to become the go-to resource for the continuation of gas exploitation in Trinidad and Tobago, gas downstream manufacturing, we would be in good straits then. Remember that our gas reserves are rapidly depleting.
Yes.
We have some north of Tobago, that's in what Tobagonians call Tobago waters, in the Colibri Fields north up there, but not a large enough pool to drive the industry that we have in Trinidad. So the Dragon fields and the Lorraine fields cross-border would be a great resource for us to rely on. Now, we take the position that we have to get the agreement of the Americans, and that's the geopolitics in which we live. And they did provide some agreement in that direction. But now, what they have really done, especially under Trump, is to revoke that because they have their own geopolitical agenda in the region and their own beef, revived beef, so to say, with Maduro. And the risk always was that that would happen, and it has come to realization. So now we no longer have the agreement of the Americans to exploit and export that gas in any
Right.
form. That means for the country a fundamental collapse, almost you might say, of our downstream gas industries
Right.
because we don't have enough to supply and keep them running. And that then means, on top of that, that foreign exchange challenges that are already so huge in the country will become worse
Right.
in 2026, 2027, even 2025.
And
That's the real story.
And even before we even get to some of the implications, why was this gas deal so important? And I mean, you alluded in terms of foreign exchange already, but why was this deal so important to us as a country?
Because without a new source of gas, the Atlantic LNG project will slowly grind to a halt.
Right.
We do not have enough of our own gas flows, notwithstanding the North Tobago fields. We don't have enough there to keep these operating at full capacity
Right.
on a commercially viable basis. So
Right.
it wouldn't take long for the industry to
Guys.
collapse in Trinidad and Tobago if we don't have a new source. And the Venezuela source was I mean, it was a good idea to go after that. If
Right.
I
Of
were the
course.
government, I wouldn't go after it with American permission. I'll just make my deal with Maduro and let the Americans deal with that.
Right. And
But,
that
but
and that brings me to the next question, because a lot of persons are also asking, and for some it's not that obvious, how does the American government get into play here? Because as you said, can a deal be made directly with the Venezuelan government? But again, we know the history, the politics, sanctions. So why is the US government involved in this, and is the agency to pull that license?
well, it's you see, it's the stance the government, the kind of sense of self worth that we have in the Caribbean space. We think we are so called backyard occupants of the Americans, but we are sovereign countries, and we ought to go about our business, make deals with whoever we want without reference to the Americans. However, the thinking of the governments across the Caribbean generally is to let me use the old-fashioned kowtow to the Americans because we don't have the spine. We're scared of them. We shouldn't be in that position, and I cannot imagine as a person living in the country from since then. I can't imagine Eric Williams going to anybody in America to get permission to make a deal with Venezuela. But that's the attitude that was adopted by Rowley and other governments actually. So
Right.
I mean I think it's our self confidence that's at
But
evidence here.
is it just self confidence, or I mean, when we look at where we are in terms of the politics of the world, sanctions, and we see what's happening even to countries who seem to be standing up, against the current U.S. administration, what's happening in terms of tariffs and what seems to be evolving or emerging trade wars. Is it fair to say it's that simple as we need the self confidence to do what we have to do?
I think so. I think you see what you're dealing with is the need for a rules based order. And what the country has to do is line up with all those in the world who want a rules based order. We can't afford to allow young people in the country to end up in a world in which bullies are able to tell small countries what to do. And so we have to cook up deals with other countries in the world to create a world order in which no bully gets to drive the world in the direction in which he or she wants it to go. Now, so you fight on that front in the UN space and other spaces.
Right.
But secondly, you have to have the self-confidence as a society to develop your society properly, empower your people, pull your people into the fight. In Trinidad and Tobago, what we have been doing is running dictatorial governments, so we really can't rally the population to fight the global competition for development opportunity. So when I say self-confidence, I don't mean the self-confidence of the Prime Minister. I'm
Right.
talking about mobilizing the country so that the whole country could be part of the information flow that specifies why we need to make a deal with Venezuela. And
And
then
we,
the country endorses that. That's what we need. And let the world say that the people of Trinidad and Tobago are wrong to want a deal with Venezuela. But when you cook it up and just have the government, quote unquote, go and make a deal, and the people of Trinidad and Tobago have no way to say we agree, then you are in big trouble. And that's the problem. That's what we have here in Trinidad and Tobago. So
right.
the Rowley government made the deal, but the people of Trinidad and Tobago did not have a way to weigh in.
And we aren't there yet, as you said. It's something we should aspire to. But let's look at where we are now, and you can correct me if I have a misunderstanding. But the companies that are drilling for gas and oil in Trinidad and Tobago are U.S. companies, and
That's well, and European Shell is
right.
involved.
Right. And when we look at, the exploration of gas, and if the companies investing are US companies, then we can understand, the involvement as well. Because when you look at the US Venezuela relationship, if there's any at all, we are like that middle person kind of bridging, because I don't think the US and Venezuela will deal directly. So Trinidad and Tobago is kind of bridging that relationship in terms of this dragon deal that was made. And again, I'm learning as well, so you can correct me.
Well, I think in our case, the main player in the cross-border fields would be Shell.
Okay.
That's fundamentally a European company. The fear they would have, of course, is US sanctions.
Right.
So they wouldn't play with us if they feel threatened by sanctions by the US, which I think is the fundamental reason the government would go to the Americans and say, well, make a deal, allow us to make the deal so that you won't have to sanction
Right.
or operating companies. But that goes to my point. It's okay to pay attention to that. But if you pay attention to that when you are exposed on the backside to American bullying, then you have to play that game. There is a bigger game. I used to be an employee of the UN. I used to be a senior policy advisor in the UN, and one of the
Right.
things I learned while working in the UN is that it works through all of these networking among countries that will allow a rules-based order to operate. That's why we built up the WTO. We made trade rules under those arrangements, GATS and GATT and all of those kinds of things. We can't operate as a society. Trinidad
Right.
and Tobago can make no progress in a society in which the Americans or the Chinese or any other country feels it has the right, or Venezuela feels it has the right to say, this is what you have to do as a sovereign nation. So we have to play the international game of alliance building. Let me just make one point to you that the
Sure.
country could observe. I recall when I was working in the UN, it used to worry me that the Caribbean voices, we had at the time about 18 countries. That makes a pretty big block when you think about it in the UN context. The voices of the Caribbean were divided voices, notwithstanding CARICOM. And so we couldn't really deploy the power of our numbers in voting one country, one vote
Right.
systems. We couldn't deploy the power of our numbers to force the deals in the direction in which we want to go because of thoughtlessness on the part of the governments. So I don't think our hands are bound to be tied by any need to go to America for permission. It's the way we engage the world that is the critical issue. And we're making a huge mistake of engaging the world on this divided basis rather than working through proper coalitions among ourselves to pool the power of our numbers, enforcing a certain kind of rules-based order to operate. And we as a people have to deal with one another in a certain way. Caribbean people have to treat people of, say, Indian descent in a way that allows us to say with moral authority to the world, this is how we want you to treat black people in America. This is how we want you to treat other groups of people around the world. We don't want you to be a bully in the world, because look at how we are treating our people here with respect and grace and dignity. All our groups, no matter who they are. This is how we treat Tobago in Trinidad and Tobago.
Right.
Learn from us. We can't do that because we are running dictatorial systems all across the Caribbean space. It's
And
a huge problem.
if I can just ask my director to show the clipping of the former prime minister who would have commented on the past, on the Dragon deal. You know, he was talking about it futuristically, but it has happened. And I thought his words were quite interesting. And I want us just to remind our viewers, because my question would follow the former prime minister's take on if this deal was ever to be revoked, the license. So if we can have that clip now.
If you see us losing that OFAC license, as you will see in the news if it happens, then you know you cook. If you see the Venezuelans not allowing us to use the Dragon field, then you know that we are in difficulty.
So are we really in difficulty? Because you have the current prime minister who had the, I would say, unfortunate task to announce this to us, the general public. And of course, he assured us that it's not instant. There's a protocol to follow. You can have the revocation re-examined. You can have dialogue. And I think the government has until May, sometime in May, to treat with it. But according to the former prime minister, if this were ever to happen, you know, in local parlance, we cook. Is it that that's where we are? What's the way forward now that we are at this point?
Well, in a sense, we cook. But we were put in that position primarily by the PNM and PNM governments ever since Eric Williams in 1956. The country didn't have to find itself in a position where the loss of the deal with Venezuela is the death knell of our economy. We should never have been in that position. When I was a young economist coming out of UWI, and even before that when I was in high school, the country leading economists like Eugenio Moore and Doddridge Allen and other prominent Tobagonians used to observe, William Demas observe that we have to diversify the economy away from oil and gas.
Right.
Doddridge Allen was an energy economist, and he used to make that observation. He specifically told me so on Cipriani Boulevard when I first met him as a Charlottesville man. This is not the way to run the economy. And we knew that for decades. So to come in 2024 and lament that we cook if a deal on oil and gas goes through is a measure of both the incompetence of the PNM as a political party and the incompetence of the prime minister, who, as a person who used to be in the parliament for 44 years. Mm-hmm. That is not, Trinidad and Tobago has all sorts of examples across the Caribbean that I'm studying for the UN today.
Right.
That we do not have to set up ourselves simply around oil and gas, or even oil and gas and manufacturing of consumer durables protected by the common external tariff of CARICOM. If you look in the St. Kitts economy, St. Kitts is an economy with no oil and gas. They produce almost 22,000 US dollars per person of output every year. Trinidad and Tobago, with all the oil and gas, produces Today, about 14,000. So you have a tiny island smart enough to do something different. And what
Right.
they're doing is they are producing education services for export and other professional services for export alongside tourism that we talk about a lot here in Tobago.
Mm-hmm.
And it is that that allows them to succeed in driving development. So they are achieving both growth and development in St. Kitts Nevis, tiny islands. Now, Trinidad and Tobago is achieving growth with no development by depending on oil and gas and what you call consumer durable manufacturers. Now, if you look in the Bahamas, in about 1996, thereabouts, when I first went there, I think, you had an economy that was producing about 14, 15,000 US per person per year, primarily on tourism. But even at that time, they saw the need to diversify, and so they launched out into the development of a financial services program
Right.
through which they are exporting high quality, high value added legal services, high value added accounting services, high value added portfolio design services, and so on. Today, the Bahamas produces 31,000 US dollars per person every year. That does not have anything to do with dependence on oil and gas. You
Mm-hmm.
do not have to be in this position. For years, we've been telling the governments, including the government here in Tobago, which also has stick break in the ears, you cannot do tourism successfully by relying on people to come here for a couple of days to visit the beach.
Right.
To work, Jamaica has 2.5 million tourists coming to Jamaica to visit the beach every year. And what is the consequence of just relying on that? 5,300 US dollars per person they produce a year. The worst performing economy. There are more airports than Tobago. There are many millions more guests coming to Jamaica than Tobago, and it's producing no development for them.
Mm-hmm.
The country should have known if they had looked at the evidence properly. That's the evidence I am modeling for the US, for the UN today. That evidence tells you the way to develop these island economies is not to rely on oil and gas, not to rely on consumer manufacturers. You have to go towards production and export of the professional services.
Right.
And we as a people are skilled enough, competent enough to head in that direction. So when Rowley complains about it and say you cook with the breakdown of the deal, he is right. But we are in that position because we are running dictatorial systems of government that do not have to listen to anybody.
Right. And Dr. James, diversification has been an forever topic. It doesn't matter which political party has been in central government, which political party has been in the THE. What do you think has really stopped us from actually moving forward? Because it's one thing to always have these conversations, but I'm always stuck at the point where when do we actually put things in place? When do we actually start to make that change? Because we all know we need to diversify. We have been saying it. It's something I've been hearing since I'm a little girl. So
Absolutely.
here we are now, which may make us which may thrust us or force us to say, hey, we really have to do something. We've been talking about it, right? But we really have to act upon it. How does a government now go about making this switch? We see the smaller Caribbean islands have done it successfully, and maybe that's because they didn't have a choice. We had a choice. When money was flowing for oil and gas, why look for anything else? Theoretically, we know not to put all our eggs in one basket, but if it's working, why fix it? But now we
But it hasn't
see.
been working. May I point out to you, you're quite right if it's working, but it hasn't
Right.
been working. If you just look at the 10 years of Rowley's tenure from 2015, every year from 2015 to 2024, the output per person of the country in real terms had declined. Every year, 18,000, 17,000, 16, 15, 14, today, every year. So if you had looked properly, you could see all the signs in front of you that even when oil prices had gone up to 90 something dollars a barrel, it wasn't helping you. You should have known, we have known for 70 years, but you should have seen the light if you were thoughtful, at least in Rowley's tenure, to do something differently.
But is
Now,
it
why
fair?
can't
Is it fair, Dr. James, to put all this on former Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley's tenure? Because we've had other political parties run central government. We've had other prime ministers who also sat in the seat where changes and policies could have been implemented. So why
but he
put
came
that weight?
last. He
Repeat
came
that again.
last. He came
Okay.
last in the deal, so he could
Okay.
have seen the history. At least you could watch what happened. Manning tried the financial services, it didn't work. He didn't know how to do it. You could have looked back ever since Eric Williams took power. The writing has been on the wall. It wasn't more than 14 years after Williams took power that young people in Trinidad and Tobago, including right here in Tobago, said to the country, time to empower our people. We marched the streets in 1970 to say, power to the people. And Rowley empathized with that. So when he went into Parliament with a huge pool of information that he should have learned from. He couldn't do anything. I'm not blaming him alone. I'm blaming the whole system we're running. He couldn't do anything with the economy because you cannot do anything with the economy if you're running the system of government we have.
Right.
You have to begin by changing the system of government. And Rowley said in 2015 when he took power, before he took power, I heard him myself in the campaign in Carenage. He doesn't want to change the rules. Well, that's the same thing as saying you don't want to diversify, because you cannot diversify if you don't change the rules. That's the critical thing that the country has to observe. Today, you want to make any new thrust, you want to get out of the mess that this breakdown of the deal has put us in, the first critical step is to set up the country properly so our communities get into the business of fighting for economic development in their own interest. Tobago gets into the business of fighting with proper autonomy arrangements. I don't mean hate Trinidad arrangements. I mean
Right.
proper autonomy arrangements to allow the people of Tobago to control what the Executive Council is doing, and so on. And diversification follows automatically from that. You know where you see evidence of that? If you look at what happened in Cayman and Bermuda, they are outperforming the US economy by far. The Cayman is producing 97,000 US per person every year. Bermuda, about 127,000 US per person every year. Now, they are both using the British Westminster style model of inclusive government. But what that proves to you is that you need an inclusive system of government where all the voices are able to share information, including the voices of the potential investors, the foreign investors, and so on. All those people are able to share information about what to do. And it is the absence of a system of government like that that is making us bungle and blunder year in, year out, because all we're doing is allowing a couple of people in cabinet to make all the decisions without having to hear from anybody else, except perhaps their friends. That's not how you're going to diversify the economy of Trinidad and Tobago.
Right.
That
And Dr.
evidence has
James, I must interrupt you here because it's time for us to take a break. It's very important.
Okay.
That's how we pay our bills here. So viewers, we go for a quick break. When we return, we continue speaking to Dr. Vanus James. Welcome back, viewers, and thank you for staying with us. You are viewing GMT Good Morning Tobago. It is Friday, the 11th of April, 2025, and we continue to have a conversation with Dr. Vanus James as we talk about the revoking of the Dragon Deal license by OFAC. And Dr. James, I want us to look at Tobago. So we're talking about diversifying, and nationally we know that we have been quite dependent on oil and gas. But in Tobago, the thrust has been tourism. Whether it's working or not, that's a different conversation. But the thrust has always been to look at tourism for Tobago's economy. But again, it's my understanding when Cove came into play, it was an opportunity or hope that Tobago can diversify from tourism and be a part of that energy sector, by having Cove. But I think we're back at the tourism sector, because you're hearing about sandals, discussions coming back on the table again with sandals. So is it that Tobago has that thrust for diversification, looking at Cove in the energy sector, and especially what's happening now? Do you think the trust should be back, at the tourism sector? And the sandals, is that the wherewithal, the savior of the day? What's your perspective in terms of Tobago moving forward and looking at diversification?
Well, let me help you to interpret history a little bit there,
Yes.
because Tobago has never had a tourism economy. It has always had a government economy
Right.
from 1898 to today. The biggest contributor to the Tobago economy today is the government, THA plus central government.
Right.
They account for about 54% of the Tobago economy. That's huge.
Right.
That means tourism is a tiny 1-2% contributor, essentially. Nothing much there. Even if you measure tourism in terms of our distribution activities and so on, you're not getting more than about 6 or 7%, really, of activity on the island. So we're not a tourism economy. We've never been.
Right.
Now, the wish to do that is the right wish. We need to move away from being a government economy, and we need to build a tourism economy, but it can't be a Jamaican-style tourism economy, or a St. Lucia-style tourism economy, or a Trinidad-style tourism economy in which you have the Carnival event once a year, seasonal, driving the attraction of visitors. You need to head down the road of what I like to call an industrialized tourism, in which you are producing capital services for export. That's what St. Kitts Nevis used to set up a development process, and it's alive and well and rapid in St. Kitts Nevis now. That's what the Bahamas used. That's what Cayman used. That's what Bermuda used. Those are the successes that we have on the record in the region, and that's the direction in which any newcomer should be heading, including a place like Tobago. What we ought to have done is to use the oil and gas to underlie that kind of thing. What Manning had in mind was the right idea, for example, with financial services.
Right.
Because there, what you're exporting is high-valued legal services, high-valued accounting services, high-valued financial portfolio development services, and so on. That's the direction in which we have to go. Education for export, healthcare for export, and so on. The housing stock goes along with that, and that housing stock that goes along with that, you see evidence of it clear if you ever visit the Cayman Islands. 80% of their quote-unquote tourism housing stock is 10 and 20 room boutique facilities that could charge a lawyer $150 a night to stay for 4 months.
Right.
You can't put an accounting firm and a legal firm in sandals for 4 months. They'll go bankrupt. That's not the way you build tourism if you are in Tobago. And the fundamental answer to the question is you've got to head down the road of what Castara is trying to do. You've got to go down the road of community-based tourism. That's what we're building up for the Eastern Caribbean right now in our work there. You have to head down that road, and you have to supplement that by bringing a lot of foreign investment into the island. And the foreign investment has to come in a special way. You can't just put out an ad for foreign investors and say Tobago open for business. What you're going to do is set up what we're building up in the Eastern Caribbean as an entrepreneurship development program, in which the communities can operate as incubators and accelerators to attract startup firms, foreign promising businesses, and so on, to come and flesh out and scale up and so on, and operate in a family-friendly environment. They come, they could bring their workers, high-skilled workers, which is what they would come for if you're attracting them into the capital services activities. And what you promise them is the opportunity to be part of the asset owning process in Tobago. They can own homes and other things like those, and they can bring their family. They can become Tobagonians by law, meaning nationals of Trinidad and Tobago if their businesses perform and thrive. You could do what Malta is doing this on a grand scale and doing it well. The Caribbean has a lot of it in the form of a citizen by investment program that we are now working with them to develop further into something that could compete on a sustainable basis and not be subject to American subterfuge. So the whole idea is that we shouldn't be going down the road of a government economy anymore. But we can't fool ourselves into thinking that the answer to that is to bring people to go to Pigeon Point to bathe for a couple of days. That can't work. And it's even worse when you are thinking of putting a hotel plant in no man's land. No man's land is no man's land. We should not allow any industry, whether sandals or who, to be located there. We could bring our sandals in, put them somewhere else. You could bring them in, but you must be going into that with your eye big, knowing that Jamaica have plenty sandals all over the place, and plenty spin-offs from sandals, beaches and breezes and other things like those. And their economic performance is the worst in the Caribbean. So sandals is not a solution. We know the solution, and it's not that kind of solution. You have to learn from what St. Kitts Nevis is doing, to some extent from what Grenada is doing. Although that needs to be scaled up substantially. A lot from what Bahamas is doing, a lot from what Cayman is doing, and so on, and head down that road. That takes time. It takes build-up of Tobago capacity in two forms. One is you have to develop the education system properly. That we can talk about another time. And then you have to bring foreign investors in with their staff, so you build up the pool of skills. Can I make one observation to you?
Yes.
You cannot develop tourism in Tobago or any other industry.
Go ahead.
With only 16% of your workers having tertiary education. You look at Singapore, it's up to 44% of their workers having tertiary education. That's the quality of workforce you need if you're a small island to compete in the world system. So the 16% we have in Tobago is a non-starter. We got to change the way we deal with our education system. And to do that, we have to change the education system itself. It has to extend beyond what we call schooling now, primary, secondary, tertiary, into the workplace in the way Germany did it. For example, you have the workplace is part of your school system. You have what we properly should call apprenticeship with certification. What we call OJT is not the model, because you need to keep certifying people on the job to have global recognition of the growing quality of their skills. And that is what allows for the speed of learning that offsets the loss of Tobago's brains to Trinidad and to the rest of the world. We have to change our model if we are serious about developing an economy.
We have to wrap up soon, but I must ask, how concerned should we be again? And I'm talking about the government will have their perspective, their responsibilities, but to us, the average citizen in Trinidad and Tobago, with the revocation of this gas license, because there's a company, I think it's EOG, and I don't want anybody coming after Tobago updates or me. I think that's formally Enron, right? If I can be corrected. And they would have been given a license, I think earlier this year, to explore fields. And then I think there's a round of bidding that started in February. So activity is taking place. Should we be too concerned about this revocation while other things are in the pipeline?
We should be concerned that if it's revoked, it's revoked.
Right.
What we have to do is ban we waste and decide we're heading down a different road. I've given you a broad picture of what that road should be if you look at the evidence. The citizens are responsible. They should hold to account the incumbents in Trinidad and the incumbents in Tobago, because if we had time, I could show you the economy of Tobago collapsed under Farley. So all the incumbents should be held to account for poor performance. And the citizens have to work out where we go from here. They can't sit back and hold the head and ball. It's their country, they own the country, and they're responsible for it.
And what advice would you give to us? Because you see, so much is happening on the international front with I mentioned it earlier, what seems to be trade wars, the U.S. putting tariffs on countries retaliating. I mean, I can't have you here and not have you comment or give advice to us, because I don't think some of us have really studied this or paid attention and understand how it can impact us, the small man, the individual, when it comes to consumerism and making purchases in the near future.
Well, the critical point to observe for Tobagonians is that if we pivot towards an industrialized tourism, there is no country in the world that could use tariffs to block your development. You can't put tariffs on the tourism product on our side. You can't, when visitors come here to buy, whether they come to go to school or they come in to buy financial services, the Trump can't put a tariff on that. It is impossible to put a tariff on the sale of the professional services. Unless you are holding to ransom every American who comes to Trinidad and Tobago and buys their services, when they're going back home, you put the tariff on them. Then it would be transparent that you're just oppressing American citizens. So I don't think if we go down the right road, we would be in any need of worry about what the Americans or anybody else is doing with respect to tariffs. The long story for Trinidad and Tobago, both Trinidad and Tobago, is that we have to change our model. The citizens have to demand a change in the model. In the case of Tobago, a change from a government economy and a bogus tourism economy towards a real industrialized economy. And in the case of Trinidad, a change away from the oil and gas and consumer manufacturers economy towards a professional services economy. And that's where we will make our way in the future. If we don't head down that road, we'll have to worry all the time about Dragon Deal.
Right. Thank you so much for spending part of your morning with us, Dr. James. It has been a pleasure. I must say, I also learned, because it's one of the areas I'm following, but sometimes all the technical jargon and everything just happening. So I appreciate you spending time with us this morning, and I trust our viewers have paid attention as well, because I think sometimes when these things happen, it becomes such a political issue that we miss a lot of the facts and the information. So thank you again, viewers. It has been a pleasure.
I checked your speakers for you, so because we have a lot of evidence. So you're going good.
All right. Thanks you so much. Yes. So viewers, thank you so much for spending time with us and continuing your Friday morning right here on Tobago Updates Television by viewing GMT, and of course our morning show earlier with Adana and Akinlabi. It is Friday, the start of the weekend. I always encourage us, yes, be your brother's keeper. Let's look out for each other and have a very safe one. And we'll be back right here Monday, of course, over the weekend. Whatever is happening, Tobago Updates will keep you informed, whether it's by our social media pages. Just follow us. Make sure, remember, that's so important, so that you can keep abreast of what's happening right here on this beautiful island of Tobago. So stay safe, and to see you Monday morning right here when we continue and we rejoin our host for the morning show.